This is one of my favorite games of all time, Papyrus's 1995 release of IndyCar Racing II for MS-DOS. This game alone is probably the reason for my enjoyment of sim racing, maybe motorsports as a whole. It perfectly complemented my 90s IndyCar obsession and let me live out those racing fantasies. And for the last 30 years, it's looked like this, until now. This is a day I've been waiting for most of my life. No exaggeration, IndyCar Racing II is now playable at high modern resolutions. I'm running it here at 1440p, a small jump from the SVGA pixelated window that we're used to. This is all thanks to Sharangad and the relentless development of a 3D Rendition wrapper. A quick history lesson that I'm by no means qualified for. You see, in the mid-90s, there were competing graphic card standards. The three biggest were 3DFX, Glide, DirectX, and Rendition. Each had a unique API and unique hardware, unique graphics cards that supported them. I'm sure there were more than just those three, but out of those three, 3DFX was pretty popular. It had a fair amount of support and number of games that were built to use it. But ultimately, it was DirectX that became the victor and what we standardized the large majority of PC gaming around. But Rendition was the odd one. It had a very short list of games and was really only around for a couple of years before being abandoned by almost all gaming studios. However, Papyrus, in their prime, releasing some of the best racing sims of all time, fully supported Rendition for a short time and ported all their contemporary titles to it, including Grand Prix Legends, NASCAR Racing, and importantly, IndyCar Racing II. Both NASCAR and Grand Prix Legends were popular enough that they ended up being ported to 3DFX Glide and then eventually DirectX. But IndyCar remained the odd one out. It never received a 3DFX port. So, as all consumers installed DirectX cards over the years, the Rendition version of IndyCar II was simply forgotten. And for 99.9% of us, we simply enjoyed the software rendering version in the years since, running at a blazing 640 by 480 pixels. But there has been a desire for something like this for a long time, at least in the IndyCar II community. A wrapper which effectively emulates Rendition graphics and allows modern DirectX capable cards to render the game. And thanks to the hard work and dedication of Sharangad, that dream is now a reality. If all that sounds a bit complex, what it actually amounts to is we can now play IndyCar II at effectively any resolution scale that we want. It has to stay 4:3, but we can scale it way up. I've been showing it here running at 1920 by 1440, which is basically 3 times the size of the software version that I'm used to. You get so much more detail, especially in the distance, but even up close, it's a much higher fidelity visual experience than it's ever been. Beyond the resolution, there were actually a few additional enhancements that Papyrus threw in this version of the game. For example, the mirrors render much more faithfully to an actual car. They have fully textured cars and track and everything behind you. It's actually quite a bit more difficult because you can't see cars to your left and to your right. Smoke is actually somewhat transparent, so it doesn't fully obscure your vision if somebody spins out in front of you. And they bundled what they called high-quality track versions, or the quote, new tracks that are featured with it. They have much higher resolution textures and detail, but were only for Michigan, Portland, Road America, Phoenix, and Laguna Seca. The rest of the tracks were standard. There are a couple other small changes, but really none of these, except maybe the mirror change, is interesting to us today. If you want to know more about the ins and outs of the Rendition version and the whole story, Tim at Racing Central did a great overview a few years back. But the main treat and the whole reason why this Rendition version is so desired these days is the high resolution capabilities. This has been a work in progress for about 1.5 years publicly, and the thread over at Vogons has well over 100 pages of testing notes and feedback and updates. Sharangad has been diligently building this special version of DOSBox and specifically the API conversion to allow Rendition graphics to be understood by modern hardware. I've been holding off making a video about this as various bugs and issues have been resolved, but I feel like the project's gotten to a point now where it's time to give it the recognition it deserves, and this is the best way I know how. Now, it's still very much a work in progress, and it's definitely not perfect. We'll talk about some of the current limitations. but Sharangad is releasing test versions almost every day and working directly with the IndyCar Racing II community specifically to improve and perfect this far beyond the scope of what the original project was set out to be. And so even though there still are a few things to be ironed out, it's at a point now where it's extremely playable and worth checking out if you have an interest in this old game. The wrapper itself is available for purchase over at the Microsoft Store for $10. And with that comes the current version, as well as access to the future versions, which will get released. Now, I've put together a little tutorial as simple as possible to get both the game and the Rendition wrapper installed. I've got a written version over on my site, and at the end of the video, I'll go through the whole process here. I've really tried to distill it down and make it as easy as possible for anybody that wants to give this a try. It is still the 1995 IndyCar Racing II under the hood. So there's no claim that this is an entirely new game or something, but it's a fine coat of paint over something I thoroughly enjoy, and I think it's going to help extend the life of this game for quite a few years to come. So let's check it out in a little more detail with a quick race around Elkhart Lake, Road America with the 1995 kart cars. All right, so headed into the carousel here at Elkhart Lake, Road America. I get a kick out of seeing this game in high resolution. Just for so long, it's been such a small, pixelated game, and so to see it in, I guess, all its glory, it looks quite nice. This is the enhanced version of Road America Elkhart Lake that comes with Rendition. It's got some higher quality textures. You can see the sky has clouds and stuff in it, and the trees and things, and the walls. Much improved over the original one that came with the game. Same exact 3D model though, and I guess that brings up the main missing feature right now in this Rendition version, and that's the ability to use the add-on tracks and all of the mods and things that have been created over the years, the better versions of every single track from all the different years and stuff. That currently is not possible. You can race all the default tracks and the enhanced ones that come with this, and occasionally one or two of the add-on tracks might work, maybe just in testing mode alone, or a couple of them actually work with everything. But there's some issues with memory and things that prevents us from currently being able to use all the add-on tracks. We'll take the green flag here. I'll talk more about that as a limitation and stuff. Green's out. It's just a 5-lap race here. I guess I'll throw on the leaderboard and see what we can do. But mostly just to chat about the game, come across the line here. Yeah, 5 laps. Up on the inside of Stefan Johansson. This is the 1995 set, and it is an add-on car set. Much improved over the default models. It's so funny how rudimentary the default model looks in this version of the game, because it is really basic. So we'll get stuck up behind Brian Herta. But the biggest thing, I mean, this is IndyCar Racing II. The game itself under the hood is the DOS game. Same physics, same AI. They're great at doing races, but bad at racing each other and racing you as the player. You kind of have to avoid them as, ooh, Paul Tracy. I guess that's a pretty Paul Tracy type move there. So we'll get on the inside. The biggest thing that I think is going to be a barrier to entry for a lot of folks with this is everybody's quite slow up the hill. Take advantage of that. Maybe get Tracy as well there. Nope. But this game does not have force feedback, which is going to blow some folks' minds that you can do a racing game without force feedback. But back when this was released in 1995, force feedback was like an arcade-only thing for racing games anyway. It was not something that you would have had on any racing game. And although when this version of the game came out in, 1998, for the Rendition hardware, force feedback was starting to become a more popular thing. Papyrus didn't bother to implement it. So there's no force feedback. You can use something like wheel check to add just some basic centering spring to the wheel. Or you can just do it free like I do. But it takes a lot of getting used to, because all you have is your eyes to tell you what the car is doing, so you have to be ultra focused all the time. I'm just so used to it from playing this game for 30 years, but it's probably the biggest thing that makes this feel super old. But it is a 30-year-old game. It's still the same game under the hood, but it looks so much better. And I think I've proven, if you've watched any of my seasons that I've done with this, how entertaining this game can be to do a full season, full distance races. And so I really hope that Sharangad can make this work with the add-on tracks because he has been able to do some improvements to it. We're using an updated version of the game. Sharangad was able to actually patch the IndyCar executable file, which is included with the download I've posted for this, that enables it to use more memory. And that's the whole reason we can actually even use the add-on car sets that this has. And I know he seems interested in looking at a way to find out or figure out how to get the add-on tracks to work as well. Something to do with the memory in the game. The game was not built to have super high quality, as I'll get Paul Tracy there. They're quite slow up the hill. So we'll now get up behind Mo, I think. Try my best here not to have a crash in this short distance race. This is probably showing IndyCar II in the worst possible light as well, being a 5-lap race. This really excels at doing full races where you have strategy and things like that. Slow cars to get by and championship battles to think about. But it can even be fun in a short race. And to see this track, this is probably the best looking of the HQ tracks. The other ones aren't quite as noticeable in what they improved, and some look a little bit odd even. Like Phoenix has orange walls for some reason instead of red and white. But this track itself looks nice, and it would be really, really cool to see what the IndyCar II community could do with the Rendition's capabilities if we can really unlock it and fully mod the game, as it were. Now, there's already been some efforts. SK, who built the wonderful Detroit street circuit, has already figured out how to get that to work in this version of the game by downsizing some textures and I think simplifying some objects and things. But the hope is that we won't have to do stuff like that. We won't have to reduce the detail of things to make them work in this. It would be great if somehow this version of the game could just support those. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But that's the biggest issue at the moment. Otherwise, you can see the performance of it is quite good. It actually uses some kind of frame interpolation like a lossless scaling natively. It's one of the options in the install of the wrapper, so it looks like 60 FPS. And this is one of those things that's always a bit tricky to see over video, so I'm not sure how it'll come across, but it's very smooth and it almost makes the game easier, both the resolution as well as the fidelity or the smoothness of the motion. It actually makes the game a bit easier than it's ever been to drive, which I've always thought this game was actually a little harder than a lot of modern sims because you can't quite place the car as precisely, but I feel like I'm able to a bit better in this. Maybe a placebo effect though, as Emo's trying to get around Ray Hall in front here. He's going to run a bit wide. I've not done a bunch of racing with the AI here, so it's tough to know where to pass. Get it up the gear. The track itself, this is the default Elkhart Lake, like I said, but I feel like you can recognize at least what the tracks are. All the tracks that came with IndyCar II are decent. I think the ovals are actually some of the worst of the original tracks, but we have so many good ones now that I really hope we can get those working with this. All right, come on to the front stretch here and head up the hill. You know, I mentioned as well the game's in 4x3, a square essentially, and I know with some of the other games that use Rendition that Sharangad's been able to unlock the resolution to allow for things like widescreen. I don't know if that would ever be a possibility in IndyCar II because of things like the dashboard, the cockpit graphics, everything that's on the screen is built to be in a square. And so if you were to unlock it, you know, would you actually see more to the left and to the right? Obviously, you wouldn't of the graphics, but would things actually render correctly to the left and to the right? I have no idea. But it would be cool, you know, kind of a wishful thinking thing. This feels like such an impossibility that somebody would actually work on a Rendition wrapper that it almost feels like the sky's the limit at this point with what could be added to it. And so far, Sharangad seems interested in adding extra features. There's a couple additional features coming soon to update the game. You might notice there's somewhat of like a fog, a mist in the air, which is a feature of this version of the game, that it has this little distant fog in it, which here it kind of looks like it's a cloudy day. Some tracks it almost makes it look like there's a forest fire or something, but Sharangad's adding an option to actually remove that, disable it, so that there's no fog in the sky, which I think looks a bit better. And it's also adding an option to remove the texture filtering. I think there's like a bilinear filtering on all the textures by default here, which makes them look really smooth. I think it actually looks pretty nice, but having that removed would make them very sharp and might look better for certain scenarios, especially if we get some of the add-ons in here. So those are already things that, that being able to use add-on car sets, being able to remove certain filterings and things, these are all features that weren't really things that he had to do, and shows that he's just interested in making a really cool wrapper and product for us to enjoy these older games with. And so I'm really enthusiastic about it, and it's been a lot of fun to test out all these versions. I've been playing around with this for about a half a year at this point with different versions, and it seems like at least every week there's an update that's come out of the alpha build of this with some tweaks and changes to test out. And you can see here and there's some maybe graphical glitches once in a while, but it's to a point now where it's pretty stable. I haven't really had any crashes on this latest version or anything, and the frame rate is actually quite good. It's maybe a little jittery at the start of a race with one of these higher quality car sets, but no worse than the DOS version itself gets. And then when you're actually racing, once things spread out, it performs really well. You get a nice solid frame rate, and with the interpolation, it looks ultra smooth. So all of this stuff, I think, is just going to extend the life of this game, make it a lot easier, if nothing else, for folks watching either videos and things that people like me would make with this. It's just going to make it easier to enjoy, I think. There's just being able to see in the distance and stuff is nice, and all the detail, you can really enjoy all the detail put into the cars, and hopefully someday the tracks as well. So we'll come through the final couple of corners. Not the best race. Have to put in some serious laps here to try to catch up to folks, and I did take a full tank of fuel, which maybe wasn't smart, but we'll come to the line and finish this one. 5 laps at Road America, just to show off the Rendition version and that it works and that it does exist. But I'll finish P13 there, and we'll jump in to a little tutorial about how to install it. All right, for the install tutorial, try to make this as simple as possible. It doesn't cover every single oddity out there, but I'll add more detail to the written guide as it comes up. So the written guide will be the most up-to-date thing. Hopefully this video, though, stays as relevant as possible over time. But on my website, which I'll put a link in the description, I've made a rundown on how to install this Rendition version. It's just 4 high-level steps, and we'll start with step number 1, which is to download and install the actual Rendition IndyCar Racing II game itself. So I've got a download to that, and this is just a zip file, which is basically a vanilla install. It's almost exactly stock, but with all the right files and things to make it work, because there's a lot of patches and stuff out there. So if you download the Rendition version of the game, and the download finishes, you'll have your IndyCar Racing II rend zip file, which you'll want to unzip itself. And once you have it unzipped, you want to put this folder itself somewhere where you want it to live permanently. And so if we take this whole folder and we'll cut this, and I have a place for this on my G drive. And so I've got a folder here that's just DOS on my G drive, where I'll put it. I've got the other version of IndyCar Racing 2 here too. So I've got IndyCar Racing 2 Rend, which is going to be the game folder itself. If I double click on that, you see it's just the files, basically the raw files for the game. It's got the special executable that Sharangad put together and did some editing to help with memory problems, but the original one is here in case you ever needed it. I've got this set up though. It's the IndyCar Racing 2 version, but with all the patches and stuff needed to support Rendition. So that will get it installed. You want to make sure you put the folder somewhere near the top of a drive. It doesn't have to be on a G drive, obviously. It could be your C drive, but you don't want it to be too deep in folders or anything like that. But it could just be G/IndyCar Racing 2 Rend, or however you need it to be. The folder name itself, I recommend just using this folder name too. You'll save yourself a lot of trouble. So that's all that's involved with installing the base game. That gives you all the files and everything that you'd need. So if we jump to step number 2, we actually have to get the Rendition wrapper. And I mentioned earlier, this is something you have to purchase. If we click on the link here, it'll bring you to the Microsoft Store. And so it's $9.99 for the amount of work that's gone into this. It's so worth it, and I really hope folks support Sharangad and all the work that he's done on this. But this installs directly from the Microsoft Store, so once you purchase it, it'll download and install straight from there. Yeah, so once it has finished downloading and installing, you should be able to open it straight through the Microsoft Store app, or it should have put, let me minimize this here, but it should have put an icon as well on your desktop. And what you want to do is launch the R launcher. So then just like that, we're on to step number 3, which is to configure our DOS settings. So if we go back to our R launcher app and click on DOS apps, we'll want to select our folder to install Rendition into. And this is where it becomes important that you've got your IndyCar Racing 2 already installed. So if we select our folder, we'll find the directory that we have it stored in. So I've got it in G, DOS, and then IndyCar Racing 2 Rend. And this is the folder that I unzipped a little bit earlier that has the game in it. So we'll want to install it here. What that's going to do is actually put a bunch of files into that location. So you can see here the path to the game, DOS, IndyCar Racing 2 Rend, DOSBox. We'll want to click the button to configure our rendition settings. So this is going to open a big text file. This is the DOSBox configuration. Anybody that's used DOSBox might be familiar with this. Don't be frightened by the large amount of text. These are just a bunch of settings that you can set to control DOSBox. And there's 2 specific things that you'll want to update in this file. There's a lot of other settings that you can update. And if you know what you're doing or want to make some tweaks to how DOSBox works, be my guest. But there's 2 main things that I think most folks are going to have to touch to get this working as needed. So if we scroll down to the joystick section, pretty far down in the file, we've got the joystick section here. So this is where you can configure how your joysticks work. It's going to be on auto by default, which is going to select, it's going to try to select the first joystick that you have on your computer. But if you want to use 2 different joysticks, like you've got a wheel and a pedals that you want to use, then you can change this to 2 axes. And that will tell DOSBox to use the first 2 controllers that you have. You can also use a single controller that has 4 axes. So if you have like a Logitech wheel that has the pedals combined with it, or Fanatec that has the wheels combined with it, you might be able to use that. This option, 4-axis_2, would do the second joystick that you have, but 4 axes on it. And those are the options. DOSBox only supports 2 controllers. And this is just a limitation that's existed for quite a long time. On the tutorial page itself, where I talk about this with configuring joysticks, I did include a link to a couple tools, specifically HID Hide, which you can try out, which can hide joysticks from certain applications, which you can hide other controllers from DOSBox to get the 2 that you want to show up to be the ones that show up. And I also use Joy to Key to map other things like button boxes and stuff to different buttons in the game. But you need to get your 2 controllers to be the first 2 that DOSBox sees in order to get something like this to work. This is probably the most complicated part of this. If you just use a controller or something, or you're going to try it out with the keyboard, then you don't need to worry about this at all. The other thing you got to change or do is at the very bottom here of the file, there's the auto execution section. This is so you don't have to type a whole bunch of things every single time that you want to launch the game. It's going to do all this automatically. And so I've included the text to this on my website as well, but you're going to need to make one specific change, and that's to this part here. After Mount C, you need to put the location of where your game is, or the directory above it. It's a peculiarity with IndyCar 2. You need to mount the directory above it. So if we look at where my game is, I've got it in G, DOS, IndyCar Racing 2 Rend. And so I'll want to include G, DOS without the backslash at the end of it as my path. If you've got it right as the first level under a drive, you'll just want to include the drive letter. So if it was the first thing, IndyCar Racing 2 Rend folder was in my G drive directly, then I'd want this to be like that. This is telling DOS where the game is. And so you need to include your folder path there. That's going to be different for every single person that installs this. So make sure you change that. Yours will probably be C if you use the C drive for that. Otherwise, the rest of this should be the same. It's just setting some of the controls for the fake 3D graphics card, set memory, and things like that. All this should stay the same, but saving this file once you fill out those sections or make any other changes that you need to, will save those settings and then use them every time you run the game. And so that gets us to the final section of the written guide, which is to configure our rendition settings. So if we go back to the R Launcher app and click on rendition settings, it pops up a window in the application, so we don't need to do anything too crazy here. And these are a bunch of settings specific to rendition. I've been setting my full screen resolution to max, and then you'll want to input your monitor aspect ratio. 99% of you out there, it's going to be 16:9. That means you've got a normal 1080p screen or something like that. I actually run an ultra wide monitor, so I need to make sure this is 21:9, or else it'll be squished kind of in the middle of the screen. I suppose if you have a different aspect ratio, you'd probably know. Most folks, though, will be 16:9 here. The application aspect ratio, for now, you'll want to leave that on 4:3 unless you want to distort it for some reason. And then download here, I've been using windowed mode so I can Alt-Tab easily out of the game. And then also enabling the frame generation. That makes it look a whole lot smoother, and I've seen no downsides in doing that. Those are the only settings I'm using. You can actually turn on a much bigger rear view mirror if you'd want, that Sharangad added, as well as show frame rates, and there's a few other settings here towards the bottom, but this is what I've been using and what you saw in all the video and everything in this. Maybe this will evolve over time. I know there's going to be some additional settings coming in here to do things like disable filtering and disable fog and all of that in the short future. So once you've got both the DOSBox rendition settings and the R launcher rendition settings set, you should be able to launch the game itself. So down here in the bottom right, we can click launch.
I'm Paul Page from Papyrus. This is IndyCar Racing II.
All right, we'll end that before the music starts, because otherwise I will get a copyright strike. For some reason that song is copywritten, which is so funny. But yeah, you should get the intro there if everything worked as expected, and then you're brought to the main menu. You might get a pop-up with the controller calibration and everything right away, but you can calibrate your controllers there, or you can go back to options at any point under controls to calibrate your different joysticks or set your controls. And everything like that. So from here, hopefully the game is playable. By default, if we go to driver info, it's going to have the default car set selected, which is the lower polygon models and everything. They look, in the high resolution, they look very, very low poly. It's funny how decent they look, I think, in DOS, but in full resolution, they're very, very simple. But I did include, as the one mod that I did include in this, I've included Pavel's Lola 1995 set, which I think he adapted from some other stuff out there, which is a much, much better looking car set that is the full 1995 grid, which is the original season that this game had. So you can race against something that looks at least somewhat modern. You can go on IndyCarRacing2.net and download whatever other car set that you want and just place it in the cars folder and come in here and select it. And have fun with all of that. But from there, all the different tracks and everything should be in here. Any of the new ones that have new at the end of them will be the higher resolution ones, but the regular tracks also work just fine. And it should be all ready, hopefully, for you to start having some fun with and enjoying high resolution IndyCar II. So it's still early days for this. I have no doubt the IndyCar II community, but also probably Sharangad, will keep working on this and making things even better than they are. And I'm crossing my fingers we can get add-on tracks working so that we can enjoy all those great circuits in high detail. But I hope this helps at least somebody out there get involved with getting this up and running and enjoying some classic IndyCar II. Like I said at the very start, it's probably my favorite game of all time, just the amount of hours put into it. And although a bit quirky here and there, it's still really fun to this day. And something like this where we can now play it at high resolution is just going to extend the life of the game for so much longer. So I thank you all for watching, and I thank Sharangad for making this awesome wrapper. And hopefully I'll be back again soon with even more awesome updates to share. But until then, this is GP Laps, and I'll see you all again next time.